Hi, it's Dwyer. It is July 25th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, folks, let me just point out that, a lot of things surprise me. You make videos and sometimes the crowd leads you. You don't even realize how big the issue is. Right? So I need for folks to fully understand, a lot of what I'm going to discuss here in terms of public feedback truly surprises me. Right? Years ago, I was talking about a young fighter, Anthony Joshua. And I had no idea how popular he was until I started talking about him in videos. And then I noticed that unlike most videos where, I'll get some feedback, but, there isn't some kind of passionate group dynamic. With Joshua, there was group dynamic. People viewed him as the next great heavyweight, right? People really thought of Joshua in historical terms. And at the time, I was baffled because I thought the UK had a historical heavyweight, and they were actively ignoring him. His name was Tyson Fury, right? Well, this is one of those moments. I've made a few videos. The Usyk victory over Daniel Dubois has people doing the math and saying this guy has an unblemished record. Right? Undisputed in more than one weight class. He closes out the last fight by, fifth round stoppage. He is leaving no doubt. And so people are asking the question, many of you, where does Usyk rank in history? Right? Everyone understands here, it's implicit in the conversation, that the crown jewel of boxing is the heavyweight title. And I agree with that. A viewer wrote, if Usyk fights Joe Parker, right? And Parker himself is a former champion. And if he beats Joe Parker and rides off into the sunset, where does he rank in history? Let's have more of a conversation. I'm guessing these videos are going to age a little bit differently than pre-fight videos, right? People are going to revisit these videos a year from now, 2 years from now, and stuff like that. I, myself, look at videos that are several years old, hearing how others rated Ray Leonard and others, right? Well, first, let me make a point, right? And it's foundational. What criteria is being used to figure out who is the best, right? Floyd Mayweather not only finished his career unbeaten, but he beat Canelo, and Canelo has gone on to have a Hall of Fame career. Right? Every time Canelo goes out there and looks good in a fight, even when Canelo's in weight classes Floyd was never in, it just highlights that this was an important victory. But yet, the middleweight crowd is different than the heavyweight crowd, isn't it? At middleweight, in fact, not even middleweight, at welter and super middle, right? Again, Floyd doesn't fight at middleweight. It's welter and super middle. And of course, Floyd has a career that predates his involvement at those divisions. We think of other names, don't we? Right? Mayweather's unbeaten record doesn't conclusively answer the question of who was the best at 147. The record alone isn't conclusive. So, guys with losses, Thomas the Hitman Hearns, who lost a showdown with Ray Leonard. That first fight's one of the best fights I've seen in my life. Ray Leonard, who lost to Duran. Right? He's in the conversation. Others are in the conversation. Right? And so just recognize the fact that Usyk is unbeaten isn't conclusive. Not only that, Rocky Marciano retired unbeaten. But yet, few of you would view Marciano as the best ever, even though Marciano knocks Lewis out of the ring before he becomes champion. He gets up off the canvas after being dropped by a Jersey Joe Walcott left hook in the first round of his shot at the title, is badly losing that fight, and then stops Walcott in something like the 13th round. Even though he beats Ezra Charles, who himself had beaten Joe Louis, right? It's Ezra Charles who takes Joe Louis's title, right? Even though Marciano beats Archie Moore, arguably the gold standard at light heavyweight. Right now, one of the worst things to happen to Marciano in terms of his legacy is the fact that Archie Moore, when he fought up-and-comer Floyd Patterson, got destroyed. Right? Had Archie Moore gone on to win the heavyweight title, this conversation would be materially different, even though Marciano wasn't a combatant in the Floyd Patterson-Archie Moore fight. Right? And so let's figure out what we have to judge to even make a determination that someone is the best or is the second or third best ever. Right? I personally believe more in short lists than in figuring out who was the best. Right? Now, is it record alone? I would say no. Right? Is it who you beat? That factors into it, doesn't it? If we're going to judge Usyk, the million-dollar question here, and it's a big one, is not just who did Usyk beat at heavyweight, but it's also at what stage of their careers did he beat them. Right now, the Tyson Fury, who blew through the heavyweight division and then embarrassed Vladimir Klitschko, right? Great fighter. But we understand, after all that glory, right? And I'll leave this as an open question, but we know Fury had some challenges, right? Mental health challenges, according to some reports, substance abuse challenges. I believe he was investigated. Weight challenges, right? I'm not saying Fury's not responsible for some of his problems. Let's face it too. Handling success and discipline are part of the game. Right? But the bottom line is, there's an open question. You can answer it the way you want to. Right? Your rankings are your rankings. But there's an open question on just how close was Tyson Fury at the time he fought Usyk the first time to the Tyson Fury who was in his prime. Right? Let's remember, before he hops in the ring with Usyk, and again, it's an open question for the crowd here, he had been dropped by an MMA fighter, Francis Ngannou, in Ngannou's first boxing match. Right? How close to prime Fury was Fury for the first fight? Let's also ask a more troubling question. The first half of the first fight, how did you score it? I thought Fury got off to a fast start. I thought Fury was well ahead. We get to the later part of the fight. You have the infamous round where Fury, goes down with the ref between them. It's not called a knockdown. Other things happen. It's a big round for Usyk. Understand, that fight was a close fight on the judges' scorecards. We can debate that. We can debate who should have won that fight. Folks, it's part of the Usyk resume. Anthony Joshua, I'll just say this. Joshua, at the time, is shuffling through trainers, isn't he? He hires Robert Garcia. Robert Garcia wants him to bend his knees. Right? The Joshua who fights Usyk, how close is he to prime Anthony Joshua? The Daniel Dubois who fought Usyk. Dubois, young champion, had destroyed Anthony Joshua, had also lost to Joe Joyce, had also been knocked down 3 times by Kevin Lorena. Right? Had lost to Usyk the first fight with rounds to spare. Right? Hits Usyk. Usyk goes down. History will debate forever whether that was a legal punch. Usyk gets up, starts jabbing Daniel Dubois. This is yet another fight where Dubois has a problem with the guy's jab. Dubois' victory over Filip Hrgovic, your scorecard after 3 rounds in that fight. Right? I thought Dubois was being riddled with punches. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Dubois wasn't deserving of a share of the heavyweight title. But if we're in the stratosphere where we're asking questions like, where does this guy rank in history? And if there's a sizable group of boxing fans who are looking at all the heavyweights who came before Usyk and who feel that Usyk is in the top 10% of all of these heavyweights, these are the questions that have to be asked. So, Usyk's level of opposition at heavyweight, right? And we'll throw Derek Chisora in the mix. Let's recognize Chisora, before he fights Usyk, had his ups and downs in his career. He lost to Dillian Whyte, for example. Chisora is in the last few holes of his career, right? He's well on the back 9, not the front 9. Right? And so, really, if we're looking at the level of opposition, is this era, and I'll concede this era is the deepest heavyweight group I've seen, but is this era on par with, let's say, an era that involved Joe Frazier, who at one time was heavyweight champion, Muhammad Ali, who was heavyweight champion, Ken Norton, who at one point was heavyweight champion, George Foreman, who at one point was heavyweight champion. Larry Holmes, who at one point was heavyweight champion. Some awfully good other fighters, right? You know, if you're thinking in terms of the hardest punchers you've ever seen in your life, Ernie Shavers, who Larry Holmes blames for slowing down Ali's career, right? Ernie Shavers, who knocked down Larry Holmes in the rematch, would certainly be on the list. Ron Lyle would be on the list. Joe Bugner would be on the list. Let's just say the 70s had an entire group of fighters, right? Ernie Shavers, many people believe, was never the same after he faced Jerry Quarry, right? The 70s had some punchers. You know, Oscar Bonavena drops Joe Frazier. People forget that, right? Is what Usyk did against this current group comparable to Larry Holmes somehow going through the 1970s unbeaten and being on the verge of matching Rocky Marciano's record when he loses to an unbeaten fighter, Michael Spinks? Take a hard look at Spinks too. Olympic gold medalist, unbeaten light heavyweight champion, goes up to heavyweight, not just beats Larry Holmes twice if you believe the scoring, and that's another issue, but he then goes on and destroys Jerry Cooney, right? A fighter with a gorgeous left hook, right? Major slugger, a guy who stops Ken Norton early, stops Ron Lyle early, right? So let me just say, you know, my own take is that Usyk is a great fighter, but he's also fighting guys at the right time. That first Fury fight could have gone either way. I would take the Fury who beat Vladimir Klitschko over Usyk. Usyk had other tough fights too. That Maris Briedis fight could have gone either way. I encourage people to go back and not just look at the opening at least 4 rounds of the Derek Chisora fight, but look at the first half of the Michael Hunter fight, right? You're going to see Usyk having problems. Let's be real too. In the amateurs, this has been downplayed. Usyk lost to Sean Porter, right? Yes, the same Sean Porter who got beaten by Terence Crawford, right? So, you know, I can't anoint Usyk, who belongs in elite conversations, as the best heavyweight I've seen, if another criteria for figuring out who's the best ever are the actual skills of the fighters, right? And an analysis of who would win a head-to-head, right? I just don't think Usyk has the firepower to keep George Foreman off of him. I think Lennox Lewis had a great jab. Lennox Lewis could get rough and tumble. Look at the Andrew Galata fight. Look at the Michael Grant fight, right? I think a big heavyweight with a jab, which would give that heavyweight ring coverage, would offset some of Usyk's speed, right? Someone who's prepared to go after Usyk could give him problems. Usyk's not the biggest puncher I've seen, right? Larry Holmes, who used to dance, who wouldn't let a pocket form in many fights. Larry Holmes would have the legs to go over and follow Usyk. Right? The question is, could Larry land his jab reliably against a southpaw? Not just a southpaw who is fighting as an orthodox fighter, which is who Jerry Cooney was. If the answer is yes, I think Larry would have too much length for Oleksandr Usyk, and I understand Usyk's bigger than Sonny Liston. So the point I'm making is simply, folks, you can't just look at the record. We've had heavyweight champions either retire unbeaten, which is what Marciano did, or retire with one glorious loss. Gene Tunney's only loss was to Hall of Famer Harry Greb, the human windmill. By reputation, some of these fights weren't televised. By reputation, Harry Greb is supposed to have been a legendary fighter. Understand, Gene Tunney would go on to beat Jack Dempsey twice. Gene Tunney would go on to have more than 60 wins. Right, folks? You have some fighters out there who've had glorious records in the heavyweight division. As I mentioned earlier, Larry Holmes is unbeaten until he makes the mistake, and this is a common mistake, of fighting a guy who he thought was too small. Right? The light heavyweight champion, that would be like Bevel going up to heavyweight. Right? And Michael Spinks was ready. Larry actually couldn't handle the coordination, the hand speed, the awkwardness. Michael Spinks, by the way, only lost to one fighter, Mike Tyson. That's the infamous first round knockout. Right? Boxing fans are ignoring the rest of a great career. If you want to see a spectacular two-handed attack on a bigger fighter that results in a stoppage, look at Spinks's fight against Jerry Cooney. Right? But boxing is a what have you done for me lately sport. So a guy who beats Larry Holmes twice, a guy who ruled the roost in another division, we overlook all of that because his one loss was in a big fight. Right? So from this seat, I would personally take a few guys over Oleksandr Usyk. Right? I know this will sound hard, but I'm not even sure if he's the best Ukrainian fighter I've seen. Now, he certainly belongs on the short list when you're talking about grades. But I'd probably take Vitaly Klitschko over him. Right? Vitaly, who, in my opinion, gave Lennox Lewis his toughest match. Right? That Lewis won. Right? Lewis lost twice. Let's remember that. But Vitaly Klitschko had length. When he wanted, he had a jab. He had a unique defensive construct, right? This guy, after all, was a kickboxer before he became a boxer. Right? And he had long power, long arms. He could reach you from halfway across the ring. If you want to see Vitaly at his best, look at his fight against Shannon Briggs. Right? Briggs underrated Lennox Lewis in an interview. Once said that Briggs was the hardest puncher he faced. And Lewis is a guy who faced Tyson. Right? Briggs had no shot whatsoever against Vitaly Klitschko. Right? I believe styles make fights. I don't believe you can look at the record. You can necessarily look at the level of competition because different styles will give people different problems. I believe Joe Frazier, who could back Ali up against the ropes on demand, right? Who had foot speed, who had a great left hook, who was hard to find in the ring because of the bob and weave, and who had a motor that would enable him to go 15 hard rounds, and who, of course, gets dropped by Bonavina, gets off the canvas, comes back, wins the fight. Right? I believe he would give Usyk a hard time. So let's agree on this. Usyk right now, pending further fights, is the top heavyweight of this era. It's hard to argue with an unbeaten record. It's hard to argue with a fighter who has many fights on the road. Right? It's hard to argue with a guy who has beaten, cherished unbeaten fighters like Maris Briedis, who, by the way, went up to heavyweight at one point in his career, fought Manuel Char, and KO'd him. That's one of the great knockouts of our time. Please Google that fight. Right? The question is, how would Usyk do against Prime Fury? Right? Fury beats Vladimir Klitschko, I believe it's in 2015, about a decade ago. Right? How would he do against that version of Fury? The question, too, is how would he do against other fighters from other eras who have certain traits that would bother him? Usyk looks a little soft to the body to me, right? Don't believe me. Look at some old interviews of his adversary in the amateurs, Arthur Beterbiev. Right? If Joe Frazier gets inside on him and starts going to his body, are you sure Usyk would know how to get Joe off of him? If Mike Tyson, Prime Tyson, the Tyson who beats Marvis Frazier, if that Tyson shows up, comes inside, is targeting Usyk's body, does Usyk hit hard enough to get Prime Tyson off of him? How would Usyk operate with little space? Would he do better than he did against Derek Chisora in the early rounds? Folks, there's a lot to think about. It's not a done deal. You can't say gold medal winner, unbeaten, undisputed at cruiser, undisputed at heavy. He must be the best fighter in history. That's not the way things go. Right? It's simply not. George Foreman, when I mentioned Foreman, I've seen a fight. It's on YouTube, where Foreman was knocked down twice. That's the Ron Lyle fight. I've seen a fight where Foreman's fighting an older fighter. Back then, if you were in your 30s, we considered you older. He gets caught and he goes down. That's the Ali fight. I've seen a fight where Foreman seems to just fall to the canvas out of exhaustion. That's the Jimmy Young fight. I'm not saying Foreman's perfect. What I am saying is Foreman's perfect for Usyk. Right? Foreman on his front foot behind a great jab. Folks, that's a power jab. That's a sledgehammer. Right? Foreman coming in, forcing the issue, might even treat Usyk like he treated Joe Frazier. Right? Pushing him off so he could extend his arms. Big man with a punch and a bad attitude. Right? I think that version of Foreman takes him. Right? Let's get real controversial here. Ron Lyle, who, let's remember, stops Ernie Shavers. Right? In a fight where Shavers, looks like he has the fight won, then the bell rings. Right? I can't tell you with any certainty that I wouldn't be on the Ron Lyle side of the play if I got the right odds. Because I'd be thinking to myself, look, Ron is going to bring it. Right? You know, Ron is going to bring it. And when Ron, you know, the guy who beats Joe Bugner, Ernie Shavers, and drops Foreman twice, right? Particularly if the fight is in Denver, where Ron Lyle was from, or set up shop. You know, if you're a gambler, you're looking for scenarios. You're looking for bargains, right? I believe Ron Lyle would have a shot at closing out Oleksandr Usyk. I know that's not what people want to hear. I just have to go on my eyes, punching power, the roughness of the individual, and Ron Lyle can't match Usyk in hand speed. Right? I'm not saying these fighters have everything over Usyk. I'm just saying the sport of boxing is far more competitive than you think. Right? So you show me, you know, the guy who walks through, Jess Willard, right? Jack Dempsey, and I'll show you a guy beaten by Gene Tunney twice. You show me Gene Tunney, I'll show you a guy who got beaten by Harry Greb, who was a middleweight or something. Right? You show me Jack Johnson, I'll show you a guy who got dropped by a middleweight champion, Stanley Ketchel. Now that's the sport I know. Right? Folks, we haven't even seen Usyk hit flush and badly hurt with a punch. We have no idea about his recuperative powers. Right? None whatsoever. We saw him hit the canvas against Dubois. That was waved off. We don't know what would have happened if that was viewed as a legitimate punch. Right? We can debate it. But we don't know what would have happened if that was viewed as a legitimate punch. Usyk had to get up within 10 seconds and then had to survive, like Marciano had to survive against Jersey Joe Walcott. Right? And so Usyk's an excellent fighter. I don't think anybody's unbeatable. I've seen too many great fighters lose big matches. I think in sports, styles matter. I think fighters some days are a better version of themselves. I think there are a lot of variables. I think there are a lot of crowd dynamics that go into scoring. Right? No one here would have batted an eye if Fury was awarded the first fight. Right? All of that matters. Right? This is a sport where we simply don't know whether Ali would have answered the bell for the 15th round in the Thrilla in Manila. The margin of victory sometimes is that razor close. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Is Usyk a great fighter? I think yes. Is he unbeatable? I don't think anyone is. Is he the best I've seen? I'm going to say no. I'm not even sure if he's the best Ukrainian I've seen. Those are my thoughts. I look forward to yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.